Okay, so want to talk Parsha Shemini. We want to talk about the fire that goes out. The first thing we'll talk about in Parsha Shemini is the death of the two sons of Aaron. We'll just set the stage that it was on the eighth day, which is really the first day. Rashi says, Rashi quotes Seder Olam, that there were 10 crowns that day. It was the first in 10 different ways. It was considered to be the first day, and it was the first day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. It means to say that there had been a 7-day ceremony called the Miluim, which the sons of Aaron, in which Aaron and his sons were installing the Mishkan. And after these 7 days, where Moshe did the service, the Mishkan on the eighth day, which was the first day, on which the Mishkan was open for ritual as usual, not business, but ritual as usual. And they performed the service properly. Aaron performed all the service properly. And that day, then the presence of God came down. The fire of God came down and consumed their offerings. And it was the most glorious moment in Jewish history, with the exception of Sinai. The Jewish people, Sinai, God came down and spoke to us. Here, our ancestors, Moshe and Aaron, built the Mishkan and summoned the glory of God to come down upon the people. Everything was perfect, and it lasted around 1 second. I mean, the pinnacle was achieved, and then the next verse says, all the people saw, chapter 9, verse 24, all the people saw, and they rejoiced, and they fell on their faces. The very next verse, chapter 10, verse 1, Vayakhu b'nei Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and Aaron's children took, and who were the children who took? Nadav and Avihu. What did they take? Ish machtato. They each took their fire pan. Vayitnuva and ish. They put fire in it. Vayasimu al ketoret. And then they put incense in it. Vayakrivu lifnei Hashem. And they brought their offering before God. What was it? An Aish Zara, a foreign fire. Asher votziva utam, that God did not command them. Vateitze Aish milifnei Hashem, and a fire went out from before God. Vatochal utam, and it consumed them. Vayamutu lifnei Hashem, and they died before God. So at this moment, where the Jewish people have reached the greatest moment of spiritual success, national success, incredible achievement, it all goes bad. And that's because the two designated heirs to Moses and Aaron were Nadav and Avihu. They were the ones who were set to take over. They were the future. But they brought a foreign fire that was not commanded. And so a fire went out from before God and killed them. We're not told what it is that they did that was so terrible. We're not told what it was. So we turn to our commentaries, and we're going to look at what the commentaries say about their fire. So first we look at Rashi. Rashi gives two explanations of what they did wrong. Rashi says the fire went out. Rabbi Eliezer says, why did they die? Because they taught a halacha in front of Moses. They taught a halacha in front of Moses. Not that the teaching that they taught was incorrect, but a student is not supposed to teach or say the halacha in front of the teacher. That's the teacher's job. The actual law is not as important as the process of teaching the law. And they were inappropriate. That's the first explanation. Second explanation comes from Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says, they entered into the temple while they were drunk. And Tadem, the proof that they were drunk comes from the next verses, which right after this paragraph, it says, Achar Misas, and after they die, Hizir Anotarim, the remainder ones were warned. The remainder Kohanim, i.e., the other two sons of Aaron and Aaron, were warned. Shelo yikansu shetu yayin lemikdash, that they can't enter into the temple when they're drunk. So Rashi offers two explanations. The first explanation is that they taught a law in front of Moses. What law did they teach? So the Gemara in Eruvin tells us what law they taught. The Gemara in Eruvin 63b The Gemara in Eruvin 63b says the full context. It says Rabbi Eliezer said that they made a drasha, they made a teaching in front of Moses. And what was their teaching? That the children of Aaron shall place fire on the altar. And they said, even though fire comes down from the heaven, we still have to do it ourselves. Meaning to say, the fire had just come down from heaven, but they said, even though the fire has just come down from heaven, we still have to bring the fire ourselves. We still have to do it. Now, they're actually correct in their teaching. Their teaching was correct, but they still shouldn't have taught it. And the Torah Tamima compares this to the Gemara in Brachos 31b, where it says that Shmuel, Shmuel the prophet, when he was a young boy, he said halacha in front of Eli, his mentor, the high priest, and he said that even a non-Kohen can perform a slaughter. And Eli said, you said the proper teaching, but nevertheless, you taught a halacha in front of your Rebbe, and for this you are worthy to death. So those are the two explanations that Rashi offers. The Baal HaTurim goes further, and the Baal HaTurim cites the big six. The Baal HaTurim says there were 6 sins that they committed. And he learns this out from the fact that it says in the verse, Asher lo tziva otam. Now, this is a little bit of a question, because it says they were not commanded, and then it says, Vateitze eish milifnei Hashem, and then it says the fire comes out from before God, Vatochal otam, and it consumed them. So if you look at the verse, the first time it says them, it's written without the vav. But now when it says consume them, it was written with a vav. So the Baal HaTurim says, why is it written with a vav? The vav is the numerical value of 6. And it's to tell us, Shechatu b'sheish b'shisha dvarim. They sinned in 6 ways. They sinned in 6 ways. Just to be fair, the word otam appears in the Torah more than 200 times. Oh, it appears with the vav 39 other times, or actually a total of 39 times. The Baal HaTurim does not comment on any of the other times it appears with the vav. It only comments this time. And he says it's to teach us 6 things that they did. And we'll go through those 6 things. Number 1, these are 6 opinions that come from the Midrash and the Talmud. And the Baal HaTurim says that they did all 6 things. They didn't. It's not that these are arguments about which one they did all of them. So number 1 is Eish Zara. They brought a foreign fire. Number two, Horu Bifnei Rabbam. So he's saying they were mistaken in bringing this foreign fire, and they were mistaken in giving this teaching in front of their teachers. They're not supposed to do that. Number three, Shituye Yayin. By the way, if you're not allowed to give a teaching in front of your teacher, in front of your Rebbe, for sure you're not allowed to contradict your Rebbe publicly. That would be an even greater sin, because this teaching is just an innocuous teaching, but the Rebbe didn't say anything about it. You're still not allowed to offer it. That's considered disrespectful. It's even infinitely more disrespectful to actually contradict them. So the second thing is that the third thing was Shituye Yayin. They were drunk. And all of these three we saw in Rashi. Number four is now we start to get more farther away from the literal text. The fourth explanation is Banim lo hayu lahem. They decide they had no children. Now, why did they have no children? It wasn't that they were trying and they weren't lucky enough, but rather they chose not to have children. It's based upon the fact that it says in Numbers chapter 3, verse 4, in its discussion about this verse, it says Nadav and Avihu died before God when they brought an Eish Zarah before God in the wilderness, Ubanim lo hayu lahem, and they had no children. So the verse mentions that they had no children. And so the Gemara understands this to mean in Yevamos that they intentionally had no children, and one who specifically does not have children is considered, who intentionally decides, I want to live my life without having children, is considered a sin. And so therefore they refuse to marry. Now, today marriage is about love, or it's about falling in love and getting married. But in those days, marriage was not something that people had an option about. It was something that the community forced upon you. You were a certain age, you got married, whether or not you wanted to. And they chose not to get married. And so therefore, they were punished, as though the Talmud says that in Yevamos 63b, that if you choose not to have children, it's like you're a shedder of blood, because everybody's destined to have the first commandment is Peru Uravu, be fruitful and multiply. Okay, so that's the fourth explanation. The fifth explanation says the Baal Turim, Natnu einehem beparnasus, that they set their eyes on the position of leadership, meaning to say they were salivating for the job of Moses and Aaron. They thought it was their time to have the job. We had this Gemara recently in the last tractate of which we were doing the Daf Yomi. Talmud tells us that Moshe and Aaron were once walking on the road, and Nadav and Avihu were walking behind them. And all of Israel was following. Nadav said to Avihu, this is on the bottom of the page on 52a, when will this is on, I think it's the last line of the page actually, when will these two elders die? So ani vata, so that you and I and you will lead the generation. That said, we want these older people to die so you and I can be the leaders. So God responds by saying, let's see who buries whom, meaning to say, you think it's your time, I'll show you who makes the time. And God took away Nadav and Avihu from the world because they were saying it's about time for Moses and Aaron to die so we can take over. So there's a lot of discussion about how this could be the case, because Moshe and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, are considered to be tremendous tzaddikim. The other sins were like temporary mistakes, but not a whole approach. To make a temporary mistake, anybody can do, but to have a wrong-headed ideology, wrong-headed approach seems to be at odds with being a tzaddik. So how do we understand it? So we'll get to more explanations as we study, but first we'll just point out now, because it's in the commentary to the Baal HaTurim, the commentary on the Baal HaTurim writes that, cites the Ben Yehoyada, that Nadav and Avihu were ready for Bnei, they understood that they needed to be the leaders in order for Bnei Israel to achieve the next level. That Bnei Israel achieved one level under Moshe and Aaron, but it was time to reach the next level. And so therefore they were hoping for the spiritual elevation of the people to have a kernel ready. And so that's what they were impatient for. They're saying, we want the people to be ready. They understood it. Moshe and Aaron were taking them in the land of the wilderness, and it will be their job to lead them into Israel, into the land of Canaan. And so therefore they're like, we want that. It's not that they wanted their own personal position of leadership. Finally, we'll go to the sixth answer that the Baal HaTurim says, that he writes, Lo natlu etza, that they did not take counsel. Whose counsel did they not take? So they didn't take anybody's advice. They didn't take the advice of Moshe and Aaron. They didn't take each other's advice. They were so gifted that they thought they didn't need advice. Somebody who thinks they don't need advice, this is a tremendous sin. So again, what are the 6 explanations of the Rokeach for the sin of the Baal HaTurim? The 6 explanations are as follows. We'll just review them for a moment. They brought a foreign fire. Number 2 was that they gave halachic ruling in front of their teacher Moshe. Number 3, they entered the temple while they were drunk. Number 4, they made a decision not to reproduce children. Number 5, they set their eyes on positions of leadership. And number 6, they did not take any counsel. The Rokeach also has 6 ways, but he has a different 6. He doesn't have the last 2, that they wanted to be leaders, which is ironic because that's in the Gemara. And he doesn't have number 6, which is that they did not take counsel. And instead, he says that their sin was that they entered into the temple without permission. And number 6 was that they brought this incense without permission. So those are the 6 explanations. Now, there are some more commentaries on this, which offer a couple more explanations, which I want to say before we go on. So the Chidushei Arim says the following. Chidushei Arim says, what was their mistake? Chidushei Arim was the Ger Rebbe, and he says, Nadav and Avihu were obviously, he says, the greatest of the tzaddikim, holy men, and they did their service with tremendous devotion. What was their mistake? Their mistake was that when they offered the incense, asher lo tzivautam, they offered the commandment which was not commanded by God to them. Meaning to say, their mistake was thinking, if it's logical, we should do it, and it doesn't matter if it's commanded. But we see from here that the only thing we're supposed to do is not that which is logical, but that which is commanded. That's the Chidushei Arim's argument. So he says this teaches us that we should perform a commandment not because it's logical, but only because God commands us. And that's the concept of the Chidushei Arim. And that's also really a theme that goes through all of the six. If we look at the others, so if we look at the other explanations, they brought an alien fire. It wasn't commanded. They issued a halachic ruling. They had to wait. It wasn't about whether it was logical. They entered the sanctuary while intoxicated. Okay, so that's bringing alcohol into a form of service. Number 4, they didn't father children. They felt we're too busy. We're too important. They said we should be the leaders, and they didn't take any advice. It all comes, all of these have a natural theme running through the concept of arrogance. The concept of arrogance and the concept that their own logic should dictate how they act. Hold on, I see a question. 3 more explanations, one from the Sfas Emes, one from the Maram of Vilna, and one from Meir Shapiro. So the Sfas Emes says, the Rashi, remember we said Rashi says that they quotes the explanation that they died because they entered in when they were Shetuye Yain, they entered in when they were drunk. So the Sfas Emes says, how is it possible that they actually entered in while they're drunk? They were such holy people. You think they had to go to the Kiddush Club before going into the temple? How could they commit such a tremendous sin? So he says it doesn't mean that they were drunk. You can't take it literally. That's what I was also saying before in response to Bruce's question. None of this can be taken literally. All of this is deeply symbolic archetypes for us to delve into try and understand the symbolism. But Sfas Emes says it straight out. It's not meant literally. It just meant that wine represents a foreign influence not coming from God, an external substance. And so wine, the Sfas Emes says, is the symbol of wisdom, but it's also the symbol of an alternative source of spirituality. So this is what he writes. He says that Nadav and Avihu, and this is very difficult for people because we live in a spiritual world, a religious world, where it's like best practices, that we bring the best practices around us into our life in order to improve our spirituality. You know, we have something from different faiths or whatever. So that was the problem, that they went in with thoughts. This is what Sfas Emes says. They went into the sanctuary with thoughts and emotions that came from their hearts, but not from specifically their divine mission. And their job as Kohanim was to be the representatives of God. And they were only supposed to do the spiritual implications that were entrusted to them by God without any of their own. They brought in their own thoughts and feelings. That's representative of the wine. So that's the second approach. So the first approach we saw here from the Chidushei Arim is saying that they did something which wasn't commanded. They followed their own logic. The Sfas Emes says something similar, but he says even not their own logic, their own heart. They had to do exactly what God said. They had to be slavish followers of what they believed the command of God. A third approach, we saw that it said, 2 other approaches we saw in the Balaturim was that they didn't take wives, they didn't marry, and they didn't have children. And also because they said, when will these 2 old men die so we could take over for them? So the Maram of Vilna says these 2 explanations are connected to each other and explain each other. The fact that they didn't marry would not in and of itself have made them liable to death by God. because we have an example of one sage in the Torah who chose not to marry in the Talmud. That was, anybody remember who it was? That was Ben Azai. He chose to remain unmarried because his soul yearned for Torah. He was married to the Torah. So we can assume, says the Maram of Vilna, that they chose not to marry because they wanted to be married to the Torah. So you might have thought it was excusable. But the second explanation shows that it wasn't excusable, because the second explanation says, no, it wasn't motivated by noble values. Because what's the reason? Why did they not want to marry? It proves that it was for their own ego, because if they wanted to study Torah all day, then they wouldn't have wanted this leadership position, because the leadership position takes on a lot of responsibilities, which would have separated them specifically from Torah. In fact, the Tanaim and the Amoraim would fast so that they wouldn't get called into communal positions of responsibility, because they knew it would take them away from their scholarship of the Torah. So these were two contradictory ideas. And so therefore, that's why they were punished, because they weren't refusing to build a family out of a desire to be married to the Torah. It was coming from their ego. So one last explanation about this I want to say from Meir Shapiro. Meir Shapiro is the founder of the Daf Yomi. He's also the founder of Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin, which is a tremendous yeshiva, which today is been reclaimed as a kosher hotel. But last time I was there, it was a medical school in Lublin, but now it's a kosher hotel. All the Jewish groups go and they study the Daf Yomi. So he quotes this Gemara from Sanhedrin that says that Moshe and Aaron were walking along the road, and Nadav and Avihu are walking after them. And Nadav and Avihu said, when will these two elders die so you and I can lead the generation? And he said, it's a great question. These were the two most righteous people of their generation. The Torah says about them afterwards, with those closest to me, I will be made holy. And Moshe said to Aaron, I saw that they're greater than me and you. How could they have committed such a sin by saying, when will these two people die? Also, why does it say at the beginning of this discussion, they were already walking on the road? The word kvar already is difficult. So it says Rameir Shapiro, he says the following. Nadav and Avihu were the holiest of the holies. It says about them when they came close to God and died. So the explanation for their death was because they desired, this is the final explanation, they desired to be close to God, but too close to God. So they were wondering, how can I get to this level of closeness with God? Meaning to say, they were trying so hard. Every day they were trying to achieve the level of Moses and Aaron. They were trying harder and harder to get closer. And so they were saying, the way Rameir Shapiro reads it is, they're soon going to die, and we have to achieve a level of holiness that will be prepared for us that we will be prepared to lead this generation. We have to get to that level. And so they said, we have to get to a higher level because they're almost going to die. Not that they were hoping that they would die. They said they're going to die. And how are we going to be able to be leading the people? But that was their mistake. Their mistake was that they didn't understand that it would have been impossible for them to reach the level of Moses. Because the Torah tells us one of the basic principles of faith then nobody will ever reach the level of Moses and Aaron. So their mistake was in thinking that they could get to that level. Okay, so this is about the death of Nadav and Avihu, and what are some of the lessons we bring from here? I think for me, the fundamental lesson is that they thought they were the greatest, or could be the greatest, and that was a tremendous mistake. And even they had just reached this level of success in helping the fire come down, bringing them to the greatest moment, bringing all of us to the greatest moment in Jewish history. And they're on some deeper level, they must have assumed that the success came because of them. It's a sin we all commit, that whenever there's success, we think that our role in it is outsized. And that was a mistake. That was a tremendous mistake that they should not have made. And what the lesson for us is, I guess, a very simple lesson, but the basic lesson is the lesson of reminding ourselves that the success does not come from us. The success will only come from our complete following the word of God, what we believe is the desire of God. I want to, since I always am focused on scriptural oddities, I want to show everybody something here in this parasha. There are actually two things in this parasha which are scriptural oddities. So the first is, if you go to chapter 10, verse 16, it says in the verse, chapter 10, verse 16, and the goat of the sin offering, Darosh Darash Moshe. Moshe saw it, and behold, it was burnt. The word Darosh Darash, the way you write the Torah, it's the two words in a row. Darosh, Darash, they're spelled the exact same way. And that is the midway point of the Torah in words. And Darosh has to be at the end of one line, and the second Darosh has to be at the beginning of the second line, meaning one of the words Darosh is the last word on one line, and the next half of the Torah is the first word of the next line. So this is, and what does the word Darosh mean? That means to make an inquiry, to make a serious inquiry. So the Gemara in Kedushin says this is half of the Torah. That's what the tradition is, and that's how we write the Torah. So the Hadrash V'A'iyun, who is the Drash V'A'iyun? Yom HaShoah, so we could talk about him. He's the Reish Rav, who was murdered in Lviv, wearing his rabbinic clothing when the Nazis came in. They killed him in the street. The Hadrash V'A'iyun says this teaches us one of the biggest mistakes of sin in violation of the Torah is when we don't make the drash. You see, his name is his sefer is called the drash, Hadrash V'A'iyun, and the word here we're talking about is the word drash, darash. He says the biggest mistake people make is when we don't make a speaking out before we act, whether or not it's permissible. To make a drash, to make a diligent inquiry, is half the Torah. Meaning to say, half of the Torah is first investigating for ourselves and figuring out what we're supposed to do. So that's what the Drash V'A'iyun says, and that's the halfway point of the Torah. We should never forget that the halfway point of the Torah is in both directions is darash, and also you're supposed to make a drasha in both directions. Seek out the truth in both ways. That's the first scriptural oddity that I wanted to show you. The second is, hold on one second. Let me find it. Hold on right here. Oh, here we go. The second comes in chapter 42, chapter 11, verse 42. Hold on. Chapter 11, verse 42. The pasuk tells us, the following. It says, Kol holech al gachon, anything that goes on its belly. V'kol holech al arba, and anything that goes on four legs. Ad kol marbeh raglayim, so anything that goes on its belly and everything that goes on four legs, including those that have many legs. V'kol asheretz asheretz al aretz, anything that is running on the earth or crawling on the earth, you cannot eat them because it's disgusting. So the belly, the vav of the word belly, anything that goes on its belly, you'll see is very large. Actually, you have to be careful when you write it because it's very similar. The large vav is very similar to the nun that comes following it. And here the Gemara in Kedushin tells us the vav de gachon, the vav of the gachon is the midway point of letters of the Torah. So darosh darash is the midway point of words, and the vav of gachon is the midway point of the letters. The Torah Tamima points out this is actually not true. If you actually count up the letters, it's not accurate. Right? So, in fact, you could also notice that because when you write the Torah, I think this vav appears on page 125 out of 245. So that's not the midway point. Not exactly the midway point. And so he writes that the reason is because we're no longer experts on how to spell every letter. In fact, if you look at the end of even in the Mikros Gedolos, you see that there's a lot of discussion. Like we said at the beginning, 39 times in the Torah, Otam is spelled with a Vav. The other 200 times, it's spelled without a Vav. But we're not experts on that. We're not 100% sure that we're right. And so therefore, this tradition is inexact. This tradition that it's the midway point of the letters is not 100% exact. I think that the reason why it was chosen is because it's so symbolic. I mean, I guess, well, I'm going to say this in a way that supports our tradition, that there's something very powerful about the middle letter being the belly, the belly of the beast, or the belly is the middle point of an animal. So it's something very powerful to say it's the middle letter. Anyway, I always get excited when I write a Torah and I come to the middle of the letter. So because that letter, because then it shows that I've come to the midway point. I'm going to say, since I have just a couple more minutes with you before I stop taking more questions, I want to say two other things about all these words all these animals that are not kosher. One of them is the chazir. The most classic one is the pig. And the other classic one is the sherets, the creepy crawly creatures that are not kosher. So the chazir means pig, but it also comes from the word lachzor, to return. So the rabbis tell us that the chazir comes because yachzir, it will return to being kosher. That in the Messianic age, the pork will again become kosher. And my feeling about this is proof, above all else, that we're in the Messianic age, because pork right now is becoming kosher. How so? You can make the pork in a lab. You make it from like a hair follicle of a pig, just like they're making chicken and meat-grown lab, etc. So pork is kosher. That now, sure, they might not put the OU stamp on it, But that's not because it's not kosher, but it's because of sociologic or communal practical concerns. But from the strict letter of the law, it's certainly kosher. The lab grown pork. It's just that we don't want to give a communal hechsher to it because we're not ready for it. But we've already established how you can make a kosher pig. Yeah, you can make a kosher pig. That's the first thing. So we're in the Messianic era. I haven't eaten it. I don't plan on eating it until like all the Rabbanan say it's kosher. But from a strict halachic perspective, it's certainly kosher. Number two is sheret. What's the sheret? The sheret is the person, the Rebbe's sherat. He's always running. Person is always running after the wrong things, after foolishness. He's not running, he's not sitting and studying, and he's not sitting and reflecting on his life. He's not having time for reflection. So that's the other explanation about the pork, about the pig becoming kosher. I'll just end with this: that the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, right? He was the chief rabbi in Morocco before he went to Yerushalayim. He says, the Midrash says that in the future it will be permitted to eat the pork. It doesn't mean that the Torah will be changed, because he couldn't understand. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh didn't understand what we were saying. It just means that the nature of the pig will change, and that the pig will start chewing its cud. So, meaning to say, once he starts chewing its cud, it'll be kosher. So, if we can make a pig that chews its cud, then that pig will be kosher. So, all we need to do is to genetically engineer the pig to start chewing its cud, and it'll for sure be kosher. That's what the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says. So, basically, why am I telling you this? Sometimes we pray for the Mashiach, but we should realize we're already in the Messianic era. We just have to remember that and do the rest ourselves. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll take questions.